This is the story of the fearsome German battleship Winston Churchill called the Beast. It was a floating fortress capable of overwhelming the British fleet. Manned by the cream of the German Navy, unprecedented firepower at their disposal. She was the mighty Tirpitz. She threatened to dominate the sea war for Hitler, and Churchill would not rest until he had seen her destroyed. He would order wave upon wave of attacks from the sky and from below the sea. Brute force, cunning, and cutting-edge innovation brought back to life for the first time in 60 years. Each attack was more daring than the last, yet each failed to sink her. It was a struggle lasting almost to the end of the war. Ultimately, it would take a genius to devise a weapon up to the job of sinking the ship, and men of supreme courage and skill to execute the plan. This is the story of the battle for Hitler's supership. Autumn 1943. The outcome of World War II hangs in the balance. Every move is significant. In the Arctic, the German battleship Tirpitz, the ship Churchill called Hitler's Beast, is in open water. A strategic Allied weather station is about to feel the full force of Hitler's most powerful killing machine. In just over 15 minutes, the Tirpitz unleashed over 50 massive shells, each one 6 feet long and weighing almost a ton. It was a scene of utter devastation. In London, frantic phone calls were made. Churchill had asked to be informed of Tirpitz's every move. Because this supership had the power to turn the whole war in Hitler's favor. In 1939, with war looming, reports started to reach the Admiralty in London. Something very alarming was afoot at the port of Wilhelmshaven in northern Germany. Construction was underway on a titanic battleship. When it was completed, the Tirpitz would be 1/6 of a mile long and would tower above the waves like a skyscraper. She would be fast, with some of the biggest weapons afloat among her battery of 72 guns. And all this with a single purpose in mind: to dominate the Atlantic and challenge the supremacy of the Royal Navy. The Tirpitz was launched in April 1939 to an enormous fanfare under the supervision of Hitler himself. When the Admiralty saw the scale of the problem, they were appalled. The Tirpitz was 25% bigger than the maximum size allowed under the treaties that followed the end of World War I. Nothing in the entire British fleet came close to matching its awesome scale and firepower.
It could do nearly 40 miles an hour. It had a crew of 2,400, and it had 8 15-inch guns. And they could lob a shell weighing very nearly 2,000 pounds, 20 miles plus. They had a radar too, which could see over the horizon. It was a remarkably formidable ship.
Something so powerful would be a tremendous threat to an island nation like Great Britain. In order for Britain to fight in the war, it needed a constant stream of arms and supplies. And these would be brought across the Atlantic from America in long convoys of merchant ships. These supply ships would be easy pickings for the Tirpitz. And without the arms and food they brought, Britain might be starved into submission. Churchill understood the awesome severity of the threat. The destruction of the Tirpitz is imperative, he told his admirals. It was the beginning of a 5-year obsession. Bombing raids were immediately launched. But at this early stage of the war, bombing was woefully inaccurate, and targets were often missed by as much as 5 miles. Over the next 2 years, Churchill sent bombing raids to sink the Tirpitz 18 times, all to no effect. Worse still, Britain's aging fleet of Hampdens and Whitleys were simply swatted aside. Dozens of courageous young airmen died. These were some of the earliest exchanges of the war, and for the first time, the human cost of war was hitting home. Comrades missing in action, sons and husbands lost, on seemingly futile missions. In the end, months of Allied bombing achieved nothing but heartache. But the real tragedy was that even the bombs that did hit their target had absolutely no effect. They merely bounced off the Tirpitz deck. Explosives expert Tony Lewis has made an exact scale model of the Tirpitz to explain why.
I'm going to set a charge now, and it's in scale to the average size RAF bomb that would have been dropped on the Tirpitz. So we're going to see what effect it has on the steel decking. 3, 2, 1. Look at that.
What's happened?
Absolutely bugger all damage at all there.
That's to nothing at all, isn't it?
Nothing at all. Just a little bit of a scorch mark, that's all. Basically, the deck armour was very strong, okay, and the RAF had little chance of damaging it with a conventional attack.
If the Air Force couldn't destroy the Tirpitz, Churchill would have to find other, more cunning means of keeping her out of the Atlantic. The result was the most daring raid of the entire Second World War. (28th of March, 1942, 1:25 a.m.) The most audacious raid in British military history is underway. The mission: to destroy the Normandy dockyard, one of the biggest in the world. The purpose: to keep the Tirpitz, Hitler's deadliest battleship, out of the Atlantic. Britain has become dependent on American supply ships for its very survival. Churchill's greatest fear is that these vital supply ships would fall victim to the Tirpitz's enormous guns. But even a deadly battleship like the Tirpitz would need a base from which to launch its Atlantic attacks, and the Normandy dock at Saint-Nazaire in German-occupied France was the only Atlantic-facing dock big enough to provide it. Whilst the Tirpitz was on maneuvers in the Arctic, Churchill ordered that the dock be destroyed. 600 crack troops laden with explosives have bluffed their way towards the dock in a flotilla disguised with German markings. Despite heavy resistance, the ruse got them right to the dock itself. The fight was on. Bold as the plan was, the British faced almost certain defeat. They were outnumbered by more than 10 to 1. Scores fell in action. Many were captured. By dawn, there was no route back for those still fighting their way through the town. One British ship, the Campbelltown, had rammed the gates of the dock, but failed to break them down. It seemed that the mission had failed. But the British would have the last laugh. Later that day, flushed with success, German soldiers boarded the wrecked Campbelltown. But their celebrations were premature. The British had hidden 4 tons of high explosive in the Campbelltown's hull, and the fuses were ticking away. Just before noon on the 28th of March, the fuses would run out. The explosion was cataclysmic. More than 200 Germans were killed or wounded, and the dock crumpled. The mission had been accomplished. The Tirpitz Atlantic base had been put out of action, and the threat to the Atlantic convoys held at bay. Churchill had struck a vital blow. But this was no time for rejoicing. The ship itself remained a serious threat, and now she had become an invisible one. Early in 1942, Tirpitz had disappeared from its base in the Baltic. Reconnaissance planes scoured northern Europe, and in RAF darkrooms, thousands of photographs were processed and scoured for signs of the missing battleship. Then, after weeks of searching, Tirpitz was finally spotted. Hitler had sent her to a frozen Arctic hiding place, deep in the fjords of Nazi-occupied Norway. For locals, the Tirpitz was a breathtaking sight.
The first time I saw the ship was one morning when I was working on my father's farm. I had seen lots of ships before, but nothing like this. I thought it was a mountain sailing through the water.
Hitler had pulled off a tactical masterstroke. In its Norwegian fjord at Trondheim, the Tirpitz could lie hidden, protected from the fate of her sister ship, the Bismarck. The Bismarck had been cornered on the high seas by the Royal Navy and pounded into destruction. But Hitler's strategy for the Tirpitz was not just a protective one. From her base in the fjord, the Tirpitz was perfectly placed to emerge at a moment's notice, attacking the vital Allied convoys heading north to Russia. If these supplies failed to get through, the Russian front against Hitler could collapse. With Tirpitz now lying in wait, the convoys would need constant protection. It would come from battleships and destroyers, more urgently needed in the Mediterranean and the Pacific. The mere threat of the Tirpitz was tying up much of the home fleet. Churchill had been outmaneuvered. The Tirpitz could put to sea at any moment. Intelligence was vital, and local men were quickly recruited to the Norwegian resistance. Spies like Terje Jacobsen risked their lives every day.
One day, some men asked me to come to a secret meeting. I met 3 people and they asked me, "Are you willing to join the resistance?" At the time, I was living 20 kilometers away from Tirpitz. I would get up early each morning and go down to the fjord to watch her. Sometimes I would stay there all day.
Soon, Norwegian spies sent an urgent report back to Britain. The Tirpitz was ready, and poised to put to sea. And then on the 4th of July 1942, Churchill's worst fears seemed to be coming true. Tirpitz was about to go into action. Her target, a vast convoy heading from Iceland to Russia across the icy seas north of Norway. 35 merchant ships, heavily laden with 600 tanks, 300 aeroplanes, and 150,000 tons of vital supplies. The ships stretched across a mile of open sea. They were closely protected by 10 British warships. Secret German broadcasts had been intercepted. It seemed the Tirpitz was heading their way with a powerful support force. The Admiralty was faced with a terrible choice: to put the precious warships at risk or call them off and abandon the merchant convoy to certain destruction. The decision was made. The destroyers called off. The convoy was told to scatter, abandoned by its protectors. Now each ship was to make its own desperate course to Russia and hope for the best.
And we couldn't believe it, that they would do this. So I remember the captain's words. He says, "That's suicide, they can't do that."
All the ships in the convoy could do now was brace themselves for the expected onslaught by the Tirpitz. But they wouldn't have to wait. German U-boats and dive bombers got there first.
When a bomb hit a ship, of course, the ship would just blow up. All you saw was bits and pieces flying all over the place. There were so many aircraft attacking that none of us thought we were going to survive more than an hour or two.
I saw the bombs coming down, and it hit this ammunition ship. And there was just one terrific explosion, great big mass of smoke. And the smokes blew away. There was nothing there, nothing. And I remember thinking, gee, those guys are all gone.
It was bitterly cold water, icebergs everywhere. Anybody who went into the drink there had no more than a couple of minutes to survive because it was so damn cold. Survivors from any torpedoed ships would probably be in boats, but they were hundreds of miles away from the coast anywhere. Weeks and weeks at sea. When we picked up survivors, lots of them were frostbitten. They were starving, a lot of them. They were absolutely exhausted, and in most cases, of course, absolutely furious with the Navy for having abandoned them.
It was a massacre. More than 150 British and American sailors died.
Now comes the tragic news of the greatest naval disaster of the war. The convoy, PQ-17, has been routed in the Arctic en route to Russia. In the last 5 days since the 4th of July, U-boats and torpedo planes have picked off 24 of the 36 ships in the convoy, one by one. And 400 tanks, 200 aircraft, and 153 men, most of them fellow Americans, have been lost to the Arctic's frozen seas. And the massacre, because make no mistake, that's what it was, will surely focus American minds on the brave men and women fighting Hitler and the Nazis so far away from home.
But there was to be one final cruel blow. Tirpitz had indeed sailed to attack the convoy, but she had never even made it onto the open sea. Her supporting ships ran into difficulties, and the order to attack never came. By the time they were ready, the U-boats and bombers had done their job. Now, America refused to risk sending further precious supply ships to Russia until the threat of the Tirpitz had been neutralized. Pressure on Churchill to reopen the Arctic convoys was intense. "While that damn ship is afloat, she will be a constant menace to all our shipping," he said. "We must destroy her." His solution would be stealth. He would form a secret army to perfect a bizarre and dangerous new way of attacking the Tirpitz. A handful of brave young men with a taste for adventure came together at a remote loch in western Scotland. Only then did they learn what they'd let themselves in for.
We had medicals and checks, and eventually were told that the job was human torpedo men. And that's the first time in my life I think I'd heard a pin drop, complete silence.
Churchill had charged his scientists with finding a new way to attack the Tirpitz in its well-defended Norwegian haven. What they came up with seemed more appropriate to a boy's own adventure than a struggle against Hitler's most powerful and high-tech battleship. It was a manned torpedo known as a chariot. Just 1.5 tons against the 50,000 tons of the Tirpitz. Small enough to go undetected, but potent enough to sink a battleship. 2 men would sit astride it. Diving to a depth of 30 feet, they would ride the chariot through all the Tirpitz's defenses, right up to the hull, to which they would attach its 600-pound explosive warhead. Its design was secret, but now for the first time in 60 years, one man has set out to test its capabilities, using the original classified plans to bring the chariot back to life.
Well, this is a very simple device. On the front it has a warhead.
Do you want to slide it straight in?
Yeah, slide it on. So the frogmen drive it into the harbour, take the warhead off, stick it under the ship, set the timer, and go out. Here you've got the joystick-type steering wheel. Forward, you dive. Pull back, you surface. And then you've got left to right, which controls the rudder. And here is the motor switch. In the moment it's neutral, you turn it that way and you go forward, and you turn it that way and you go back. It's very, very simple. But it's a very difficult machine to use because there are so many things that can go wrong with it. It's electrically powered. You've got to make sure the batteries are fully charged. The electrical motor can break down. And of course it weighs nearly 2 tons. So to control that in water is extremely difficult.
In the battle to sink the Tirpitz, something this unreliable could only be a gamble. But Churchill was becoming desperate. As the prototype was rushed into production, the men who would soon take it into battle against the mighty Tirpitz went into training. Without a finished chariot, they were forced to improvise.
We treated it like a motorbike. Or give a young man a motorbike, this is great fun. Just remember that we were sort of 19, 20-year-olds and not very responsible people.
The calm water of the Scottish lochs was a long way from the storm-whipped Arctic where the chariot would see service, but it had already become apparent that charioteering would be a risky business.
We used to go out and sit on the bank outside. There was about 20 of us talking over it. And one very wise man, he said, "You know, I think this is going to be a dangerous damn job."
The charioteers were Britain's very first frogmen. Diving was still in its infancy, and no one knew how these men would respond to their training underwater.
They wanted young people, they wanted fit people, but after that, I don't think they knew how individuals would react.
To simulate the pressures they would encounter underwater on a chariot mission, the trainees were shut into a compression tank. Doctors and psychiatrists would monitor the effects of pressure on the body and weed out the weak. The charioteers named the tank the Chamber of Horrors.
One chap I remember very well was claustrophobic. And they got the alarm, and of course they dragged him up, lay him flat out on the deck. And we had a hell of a job to get him on because his arms and legs were flailing around.
Many men fell by the wayside, returning to the ranks sworn to secrecy. One man died. The few who passed the tests were ready to attack the Tirpitz. The ship's first line of defense against underwater attack was steel netting stretched out across the fjord. Beyond lay a potential barrage of depth charges and machine gun fire. Robert Hobson and Navy diver Jim Queen are testing their rebuilt chariot. Their aim, to cut the steel mesh and guide the chariot through. Even with modern diving equipment, it's a difficult and dangerous business.
What we're doing today is we're going to lower this anti-torpedo, anti-submarine net into the water and try and reenact the torpedo and the divers in the torpedo going up and trying to cut through this as the old frogmen did in the Second World War. Basically, once the torpedo goes up to the net and finds the net, one of the divers, usually number 2 diver, gets off the torpedo, makes his way onto the net and has to start cutting a big enough hole to get the torpedo through. And then basically the guys have got to walk it through so that it doesn't snag up on the net, you know, make sure nothing catches up. And then once through the other side, the diver climbs back on board and they carry on their way to hopefully not find any more nets.
Yes, look at that. They've made it. That is fantastic. My word, look at that hole.
And you see there's the hole that we cut
There's
through?
a hole, yeah. Well done. Very pleasing. But you didn't have explosions going off with the boats going round the harbour, dropping hand grenades over the side, you know.
The charioteers had their plan. What they needed now was a way of getting the chariots across the North Sea. They called on the Norwegian resistance for help. And on the 26th of October 1942, a seemingly ordinary Norwegian trawler set course towards the Tirpitz lair in Trondheim. On board, just a handful of charioteers, disguised as sailors. And below the waterline, 2 chariots strapped to the trawler's hull. But after 5 uneventful days at sea, the plan ran into trouble. On the horizon, the thing the crew had dreaded most, a Nazi patrol boat heading straight for them. As the charioteers hid below, a boarding party began their inspection. Held at gunpoint, the crew stayed calm. The emergency drill was going to plan, but for one thing. Just moments before the patrol boat was spotted, a diver had been sent down under the trawler to deal with a damaged chariot. If he surfaced, the game would be up. Minutes ticked by, no sign of the diver. The search was almost complete. And then, a hammering on the hull. But one of the resistance agents on board was thinking quickly. Hammering, this time from the engine room, drowning out the sounds of the diver's repairs with his own banging. Bold, simple, and incredibly risky. But it worked. It had been a narrow escape. Now the charioteers were just 10 miles away from the Tirpitz, almost within striking distance. But luck wasn't on their side. Just a few hours later, they ran into a sudden storm. Tossed in heavy seas, both chariots came away from the trawler and were lost on the bottom of the fjord. Churchill's underwater army had risked so much and come close. The gamble had failed. But Churchill could smell success. He ordered that efforts be redoubled. The next underwater attack would be on a much more sophisticated scale. Meanwhile, still the Tirpitz brooded. No one on the ship knew how close it had come to being destroyed. But the ordered routine of her Norwegian hideaway was not to last much longer. (1943). The Tirpitz, the most destructive weapon in Hitler's arsenal, has every Allied ship to pass through Arctic waters, dreading her appearance. But on the ship, all was not as it should be. The great naval battles the crew had expected had failed to materialize as yet. Optimism was fading. Over 2,000 men becoming bored and distracted.
Der Besatzung ist es schon ein bisschen auf dem...
There were daily maneuvers, of course, but the ship never left the fjord. It wore people down.
The iron discipline that characterized the Tirpitz in her early days was slipping. Fraternizing with the enemy was punishable by death, but by now, some were ready to ignore the rules, even fathering children with local women.
We used to take things off the ship, cigarettes, things that were impossible to get on land. Sometimes we took a bottle of schnapps. It wasn't allowed, but we did it anyway. And it did guarantee us some fun with the girls.
Such indiscipline was the first chink in the Tirpitz's mighty armor, and it was eagerly pounced on by Norwegian spies. The message was quickly passed back to London. The time was right to launch another attack. Churchill's plan to sink the Tirpitz with manned torpedoes had failed. But his faith in his backroom army of boffins remained undiminished, and they didn't let him down. Their new plan involved an entirely new way of thinking about sinking the Tirpitz. They would aim to blow a hole not in the deck by bombing, or in the sides of the ship by the use of torpedoes. They would attack the most vulnerable part of the ship, where its armor plating was thinnest, the bottom of its hull. With their scale model of the Tirpitz, explosives expert Tony Lewis and his team of technicians are testing the effects of bombing.
Think she'll hold?
Conventional bomb attacks, represented by scale charges, have virtually no impact on the ship's structure.
3, 2, 1. Yep, nothing at all. Look at that.
Torpedo attacks do little better.
3, 2, 1. Whee! There we are. Look at that. Nothing.
Not a scratch.
Nothing at all.
But a charge placed directly underneath the ship has an entirely different effect.
3, 2, 1. I think we've got a...
Whoa, yes. Look at that.
Fractured.
All 4
We've holed her. She's got 4 holes.
Wow.
Right through the thickest part of the armour as well. So that really did damage her. Yeah. So when the explosion occurred, it's much easier for the explosion to actually pass through the battleship than it is to try and push all this volume of water away. As you know, water cannot be compressed. So poor old battleship gets it instead.
But to plant explosives right underneath the most fearsome battleship afloat would require an unheard-of combination of stealth and audacity. What the boffins came up with was one of the most extraordinary inventions of the entire war. The X-Craft. The X-Craft was a midget submarine that James Bond would have felt perfectly at home in. It was far more sophisticated than the experimental chariot, and it was classified top secret. In its cramped interior, it could house 4 of the Navy's most intrepid sailors.
I thought it was jolly uncomfortable and very wet, but I thought in for a penny, in for a pound. When you're young, you do all sorts of foolish things.
The X-Craft could dive to 300 feet and travel underwater for 300 miles. It would carry 4 tons of high explosive. But before they could lay their charges underneath the Tirpitz, the X-Craft would have to overcome an extensive and sophisticated array of defenses.
This is our target, the Tirpitz. Recent intelligence let us know it is moored in a fjord in northern Norway, and you can just see the nets surrounding her, which protect her from attacks by torpedoes. This overhead view of the Tirpitz shows a better example of the double nets which surround it. But in addition to the nets, there are other protective devices, underwater listening posts, hydrophones, and up in the mountains there are smoke generators which can generate smoke and provide a smoke screen to try and hide the Tirpitz from any overhead aircraft. Now this is a picture of Carr Fjord with the Tirpitz in the corner, and it shows the entrance to the fjord, which is protected by anti-submarine nets, and it's through or under that net which the 3 midget submarines will have to move when they go to attack the Tirpitz in the corner. This is the Admiral commanding and the commander of the Tirpitz, and the crew, highly trained, very efficient, will be looking out for any intruder of any kind.
The X-Craft mission would place the highest demands on the X-Craft crews. They would need to get closer to the Tirpitz and its enormous guns than any enemy had ever done before. Timing would be crucial, and the British once again turned to their allies in the Norwegian underground.
My main job was to gather information about the Tirpitz from the locals in the fjord. I used to make drawings of the smoke batteries and any guns I saw in the hillsides.
Terje and his resistance colleagues also collected information from local women, cooks and cleaners working on the Tirpitz. And from them came a precious piece of information. On the 22nd of September, the ship's underwater radar would be switched off for maintenance work, and her guns deactivated for cleaning. And so the date for the X-Craft mission was set. For the ship's crew, seemingly invulnerable in their Norwegian hideaway, life went on as normal. Meanwhile, 4 X-Craft set out to cross the Arctic Ocean towards their destiny. Just getting them there was a major operation. Incapable of making the 1,200-mile journey under their own steam, they were towed by full-size submarines. 1 X-Craft was lost in transit with all its crew. Then, after 10 days at sea, the remaining X-Craft arrived at the edge of Carr Fjord, the entrance to the Tirpitz lair.
We came close to the Tirpitz and dived to 50 feet. We hit a net, and we went to 70 feet, hit a net, we went to the bottom, about 110 feet. And the Germans, being Germans, are very thorough. They had anti-torpedo nets right down to the bottom. And so we came up to periscope depth again, and we were lucky again to see a little gate open with a small boat going through, and we went behind it.
They were now directly underneath the Tirpitz. all 50,000 tons of it.
We laid a charge, and then the other charge, having set them to go off at 8 o'clock. And by that time, the Germans knew something was up because they were throwing hand grenades and shooting madly at seagulls.
I looked out of the porthole, and at that very moment, there was a commotion in the water. Just 3 to 4 meters away, a dark object, the hull of a submarine, came up through the water. It was incomprehensible to me, as we were inside the net barrier.
In fact, the X-craft had first been spotted over a quarter of an hour earlier, but the sighting was dismissed by the officer on watch as probably just a porpoise. It was a carelessness that would cost the Germans dear. Meanwhile, realizing they'd been spotted, Lorimer's crew were preparing for capture.
If you know you're going to be captured, you must destroy any secret equipment you've got. I mean, it's like confidential books, which all you dump over in the sea. And we had all the papers of when we were attacked, how we were attacked, and everything else. And so what we couldn't burn, we ate.
Lorimer's crew were taken on deck and given blankets and coffee. They were joined by 2 survivors from another X-craft. The third had disappeared under heavy attack. Underneath the ship, unknown to the Germans, a pair of the biggest mines ever deployed in the war. It was then that Lorimer did something truly extraordinary.
Well, we told them they were going to blow up in an hour's time. We were very British. I mean, the objective exercise was to destroy the ship, not necessarily to destroy sailors.
The captain faced a terrible choice. Try to save the Tirpitz and risk the lives of his crew, or abandon ship. He ordered that the ship be moved at once. But it would take time to build up enough steam to power the ship's enormous engines. While the German crew tried everything they could to move the Tirpitz away from the mines, all the British X-crafters could do was wait. If their charges went off, their mission would have been successful, but held captive on the ship, they would pay the ultimate price.
If you ever think you're going to die, you won't do what you're going to do. You never think you're going to die, you never think you're going to be taken prisoner. You just think life goes on.
Just as the desperate attempts to move the ship seemed to be succeeding, the mines exploded.
Suddenly there was an explosion. The ship jumped up about a meter in height. Everything went flying through the room.
The shockwave from the explosion smashed its way right through the ship, wreaking havoc.
People were launched into the air, and when they landed with a big bang on the deck, they broke their bones.
The lowest decks below the waterline were the worst affected. A huge hole had been punched in the hull. Scores were dazed and badly wounded, but lucky to get out alive. Miraculously, the British captives were completely unharmed.
The captain of the Tirpitz managed to winch in to starboard, so the bulk of our explosion went up on the port side. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you now. I don't think anybody really knew until after the war the severe damage we did do. I certainly didn't, but then I'm a tiny cog in a bloody great wheel.
In fact, the Tirpitz had been badly hit.
The damage was very serious, to the engines in particular. The turbines were bashed in and the rudder was damaged. And as for the artillery, well, our entire artillery's precision was totally destroyed. All its machinery was damaged and had to be adjusted.
But back in Britain, the Admiralty had no idea how successful the mission had actually been. Another attack now, by sea or air, might have finished her off. And while no attack came, 800 workmen arrived from Kiel and worked day and night getting the ship ready again to put to sea. Churchill's golden opportunity had been lost. On the bridge, the captain rallied his troops and made a vow of vengeance. And in Whitehall, a momentous decision was made. The old combination of eccentricity, bravery, and brilliance would never rid the Allies of the menace of the Tirpitz. Attacks on the ship were about to shift to an altogether bigger scale. January 1944. Winston Churchill and the Allies are working on plans for D-Day, the Allied invasion of occupied France. It would be the greatest turning point of the war, a mighty seaborne invasion on a scale beyond any that went before. But the Tirpitz was casting a long shadow over their arrangements. If this floating fortress were to attack the armada of ships crossing the Channel, it could turn the operation into a massacre. Fear and doubt filled Churchill's mind, exactly as Hitler intended. Hitler's strategy of keeping the Tirpitz at anchor in Norway meant that the Allies were constantly dreading her appearance, without the Tirpitz itself ever being put at risk. Tactically brilliant, but the impact on the ship's crew was another matter. Months of inaction is bad for fighting men. Bored and frustrated, they were looking for release. Then, the malaise on board suddenly took a darker turn. An ordinary seaman, an 18-year-old gunner named Turowski, had deserted in search of sanctuary from the tedium of everyday life and the misery of the continuing Allied attacks. His taste of freedom was short-lived.
I was on lookout duty, high up on the foremast, so I could see everything. But at the crucial moment, I had to turn away. I did like Turowski. I knew him very well.
The worst part was his own workmates were the ones who had to shoot him. And his division officer, a man called Prince Spies, was the one who had to give the order to open fire.
Feuer!
It was a show of brutal force to keep the crew in line, but it was nothing compared with what they were soon to suffer. With Tirpitz threatening the D-Day plans, Churchill ordered one more attempt to destroy her by air, this time using Fleet Air Arm bombers with American Corsair fighters in support. On the 3rd of April 1944, 41 of the new Barracuda dive bombers took off from aircraft carriers stationed in the Arctic. It was one of the heaviest naval bombing raids of the war.
When the air alert sounded, you expected the attack within the next 2 or 3 minutes. And for me, this moment was truly awful. I was scared to death. All our guns, all our anti-aircraft guns started firing. And then there wasn't a minute to think. It was just a question of reloading the barrel with cartridges as quickly as possible. The noise was absolutely hellish, as you can imagine. So you really didn't hear the bombs hit. And there must have been a lot of them. Then suddenly there was a hot rush of air from below across my face. And when the dense smoke had settled a bit, we saw that there was a huge hole in the deck behind us from a bomb that had hit the cadets' mess and had ripped open the deck.
Dort sind eine ganze Anzahl Kameraden überrascht worden von diesem Treffer und deren...
A great many comrades had been surprised by this hit there, and their dead bodies were lying all twisted on the floor. In the explosion, their clothes had been blown away. I was in shock.
Ein Schock bei mir ausgelöst.
The ship had been hit by 15 bombs. 135 men died, and it would take 3 months to repair her. The Tirpitz was bloodied, but still unbowed. Churchill had thrown all he had at destroying the ship, and still she remained afloat. Now it seemed to him that only one man had the wherewithal to finally sink the Tirpitz. Barnes Wallis, the man behind the bouncing bomb. This extraordinary invention had famously destroyed the Ruhr dams in Germany in 1943. But now Wallis was thinking even more ambitiously. He was working on a design for a bomb larger and more destructive than anything that had gone before. An armor-piercing earthquake bomb, nicknamed Tall Boy. The Tall Boy would stand 20 feet high and weigh in at almost 12,000 pounds. Testing had proved the bomb's potential. It left craters up to 100 feet wide and 35 feet deep. Production started immediately, with a special army of female munitions workers assigned to the job. Torpex was chosen as the explosive agent in the bombs, the most destructive material the Allies had at their disposal. 5,000 pounds of it per bomb, each one taking 2 whole days to fill. It looked like a wonder weapon, and something that could finally match the might of the Tirpitz. But Wallis had calculated that for the Tall Boy to penetrate the heavily armoured deck of the Tirpitz, it would have to be dropped from a height of between 15 and 20,000 feet. To score a direct hit from that altitude would require breathtaking skill and pinpoint accuracy. In an air force where pilots were still often young and inexperienced, who could possibly be up to the job? Churchill turned to the most talented and glamorous squadron in the Air Force. 617 Squadron. The Dam Busters.
617 is a magic number. Anyone related to aviation in any way over the years, if you say 617 to them, they know immediately it means 617 Squadron or the Dam Busters.
It was a special squadron in the Air Force. After its first raid, they had this experienced squadron, experienced air crews on it, battle-hardened people, and we're nothing didn't know what to do with it.
We weren't told what the actual target was until briefing, but we were told we were going after something rather special.
For the Allies, it seemed the struggle against the Tirpitz might finally be turning their way. At last, technology to match that of the Germans, in the hands of the finest flyers in Britain. But there was one last problem to overcome. The Tirpitz was just too far away, out of range of even 617's four-engined Lancasters. The solution would be radical. A staging post from which to launch an attack. And Churchill found it close to the town of Archangel in rural Russia, almost 1,500 miles from the nearest RAF station. It turned out to be little more than a near-derelict airfield and some very shabby accommodation. Hardly a fitting home for the famous dam busters.
Out came an open lorry with some villainous-looking chaps in German greatcoats, captured. They were Russian soldiers, but they looked as if they would knock us off for 5 rubles.
The Russians are very primitive people. They were in those days, and I don't think they've improved much today. I've no idea, I'm prejudiced, but they were very primitive in those days. Sanitation I won't describe on television, but it's absolutely awful. We had companions in the bed, but they were bugs.
Oh, look at them. This one. Oh, well, I'm off to bed.
There's one we didn't all get dysentery or something like that. But anyway, we survived. We were tougher in those days, you see.
For several days, they bided their time with their Russian hosts, waiting for the weather to improve. Fish heads and green potatoes were on the menu, and conversation was difficult.
He had a glass full of clear liquid, which he raised and made a toast to the Royal Air Force, and took it. I decided we'd better do a toast to the Red Army, and I would do likewise. Of course, it was neat vodka. Whew.
It was far from ideal preparation for a mission the Allies hoped would swing the war decisively in their favor. On the Tirpitz, meanwhile, radio reports were now coming thick and fast. Allied advances from the Normandy beaches, crushing defeats on the Russian front. The end was looming for Hitler and the Nazis. German visions of the Tirpitz commanding the waves had been forgotten. The beast was cornered. Back in Russia, all minds were fully focused on the coming attack. The plan was to fly across the mountains to launch a surprise attack before a defense could be mounted. Each plane would carry a single weapon, the enormous new Tallboy bomb. One chance each to finish off the Tirpitz. Only a direct hit would do, from 15,000 feet. On September the 15th, the all-clear finally came. 27 Lancaster bombers took to the skies. But just as the bombers fixed the Tirpitz in their sights, smoke generators hidden on the side of the fjord were activated, and the ship simply disappeared to a dense smokescreen.
Smoke began to billow out, and they had a marvellous smokescreen all around the fjords, and no way could you get a decent bombing run on the ship. So I just didn't bother to bomb. When we first got Tallboy, Leonard Cheshire said it was a marvellous weapon we had from Dr. Barnes Wallace, and it was expensive. And he said, now, I don't want you dropping this all over Europe. If you can't drop it on the target, bring it back.
After so much anticipation, it looked like yet another mission had failed. But unknown to the Allies, one Tallboy, dropped into the smokescreen out of sheer frustration, had found its target.
We were just amazed afterwards when we saw that enormous gaping hole in the side of the ship. We talked among ourselves and said, wow, they really got us this time.
Hitler moved quickly. He ordered the ship to be brought 200 miles south to the apparent safety of Tromsø. It was to be a fatal mistake. For now, the Tirpitz was just in range of bombers flying direct from British airfields. Just weeks later, 617 Squadron would be back in the air again. But now, only a day or two of light was left before the permadarkness of the Arctic winter. If Tallboy was finally going to sink the Tirpitz, it was now or never. "2 a.m., 12th of November 1944. 617 Squadron have been given the order to scramble. Their mission, one last crack at the mighty German battleship Tirpitz before the permanent night of the Arctic winter puts her out of reach.
As we flew towards Norway, the sky was absolutely clear, and dawn really came through. We discovered the sky was gin clear. We could see for miles and miles, 100 miles, and we thought, whoa, you know, probably ideal conditions we might get at this time.
In the fjord at Tromsø, the Tirpitz no longer had a smokescreen to cover her, but she was not unprotected. At an airfield just 40 miles away, a squadron of German fighter planes had been placed ready to take to the skies to defend against an air attack on the ship.
And all the time, nagging away at the back of one's mind was, what about these fighters? What about these 109s, these Messerschmitts?
Weren't you scared?
Well, people have asked me, I don't think I was, and I can tell you the reason I think I wasn't. I don't have any imagination. I'm straight down the middle, chap, and it never occurs to me what might happen.
All our binoculars were pointing in the direction of the expected fighters, but we couldn't see anything. Then a real uneasiness started to creep up on us. If those fighters didn't turn up, things would get very nasty. Each one of us knew that.
But the fighters never came. They had been sent to the wrong fjord.
Most un-Germanic, they didn't arrive. Now, if they had arrived, they could have dealt with a lot of us.
As the British Lancasters neared their target, all the Tirpitz had left to defend itself was her own guns.
Suddenly I was conscious of seeing great big orange clouds going off and realized that they were firing their big guns at us.
The bomber planes came from the back of the field. The artillery shot their first salvo, but the grenades exploded underneath the plane formation.
Explodierten die Granaten unterhalb.
We soon got beyond range of those. And I think we saw her down there lying black. There were no smoke generators there. There were no mountains close enough. And it became almost like a practice bombing run. We were heading right down the line. And Frank was saying, this is great, Skip, great, 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 hold it, hold it, hold it. Then came the red light. And then down went Tallboy.
It flew for a while with the plane. Then it looked smaller and you saw it flying towards you. I suppose then it became too fast because you couldn't see it anymore.
I've watched smaller bombs, even one-ton bombs fall, and they seem to roll over before they settle down. Not the Tallboy, that went, just as if you'd fired an arrow, absolutely dead straight. And the tallboy went through the speed of sound before it hit the target. Nothing could have stood at that. No matter how powerful the battleship was, how armored it was, no, it was doomed to be destroyed.
Three tallboys had found their target. Huge holes blasted through the Tirpitz deck.
We were leaning at an angle of about 40 degrees, and the gun turret called Bruno, the highest tower on the stern, just exploded. It was a tremendous detonation, and the whole tower flew through the air over towards the port side, where the crew had already abandoned the ship and was swimming towards the shore. All of them were lost without hope. They all died underneath that tower.
There was no great emotion, really. There was too great a distance, and it was a target. It was like a toy, a little toy down there, and suddenly you couldn't see it.
The ship had capsized. Almost 1,000 men would drown or suffocate, trapped inside the Tirpitz's mighty upturned hull.
We saw it as a victory, but at the same time, I thought of all the young German sailors who had lost their lives in just a few seconds. It was pitiful, really. All the men we lost, all the wounded and the dead. It was horrific. Horrific.
Back at home, the waiting was over. 5 years of effort and sacrifice had finally paid off. It had taken almost 40 attacks in total, and in the end, neither brute force nor stealth were sufficient. The Tirpitz had been undone by cutting-edge technology.
From an average of about 15,000 feet, up and down a bit for the various numbers of aircraft, we had put bombs onto this very small target, which, I don't think they can do very well even today.
Churchill's obsession had finally driven him to destroy the beast. For the Allies, it was a long-awaited victory. For Hitler, another heavy blow on the road to ultimate defeat. For the men of the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy, an epic story of bravery, tragedy, and triumph had finally reached its climax. And for the survivors of the Tirpitz, an adventure that began with hopes of winning the war for Germany had ended with merciful release after 5 years of ever more deadly attacks. Tirpitz, pride of the German Navy, scourge of convoys, was a thing of the past.